Welcome to First 3 Years Infant Mental Health Build Up Conference 2023. I'm Callie Bennis, the CEO of First 3 Years. Thank you for being here with us today to focus on innovative practices that service infants, toddlers, and their families. When we think of innovation, we often picture the Industrial Revolution, a time of mass mechanical innovation that dramatically changed the landscape of the modern world. This time period is generally revered as having taken place from the 1760s to about 1840. However, the innovative overhaul of our society wasn't just limited to mechanics and engineering. In 1840, Charles Darwin formally introduced us to the study of children. This doesn't mean that others haven't wondered and explored how children develop even before that. In the early 1800s, Frederick Froebel had an innovative idea: kindergarten, a place where play and trained teachers were highly valued. He recognized the importance of the early stages of education. Before him, there was John Locke in the 17th century, an innovative thinker that believed children were blank slates at birth whose knowledge was determined by experience. Before, during, and after John Locke and Frederick Froebel, Charles Darwin, and Jean Piaget, there were parents and caregivers. Those of us who immerse ourselves in the lives of our little ones, who nurture them and watch them grow. We have real life exposure to the development and needs of young children day in and day out. It often isn't the writings of past innovators in the field that we turn to for information and support, but our instincts and each other. Inside each one of you is the instinct to meet the needs of the infants and toddlers you're caring for, and the passion to give them the best start in life. Now, as a professional in the field, you have each other too. A network of childcare professionals who can brainstorm, collaborate, and explore innovative ways of meeting the needs of every child you serve. Innovation doesn't have to be a thesis paper or a documented experiment. Innovation can be trial and error in an everyday setting. It can be an aha moment when something you developed or implemented has an impact on a child. Today and tomorrow, you will hear from scholars and experts in the field who have developed innovative practices that support infants, toddlers, and their families. But you'll also meet colleagues and friends who have lived experiences with the same young audience that may inspire you just as much. Let all of their wisdom and insight serve as a spark or jumping off point for your next innovative idea, no matter how big or small. An innovation is something new or different, and that idea can start with anyone. I implore you to make the most of this conference, our presenters, and the attendees. It may just spark an innovative idea in you. Thanks for joining us today. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Jaira Knight to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Callie, for such a wonderful welcome and for reminding us of why we are all here today and tomorrow. My name is Jaira Knight, and I am the Director of Professional and Parent Education here at First 3 Years. Before we get started today, I want us to just ground ourselves for the information that we are going to receive today. So we are going to start with a moment of mindfulness. Thank you so much for joining in that moment with me. I hope that you were able to find a moment of calm and focus to help prepare your mind and body for the exciting information that we are going to receive today. Over the next 2 days, we will engage in 4 separate sessions. Our opening keynote will be presented by Dr. Joshua Sparrow. He is the Executive Director of the Brazelton Touchpoint Center in the Division of Development of Medicine and Boston Children's Hospital, where he also holds an appointment in the Department of Psychiatry. At the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, his work focuses on cultural adaptations of family support programs, organizational professional development, and aligning systems of care with community strengths and priorities. Examples include collaborative consultation with the Harlem Children's Zone and tribal early Head Start/Head Start programs, among others. He will present a lecture this morning with additional Q&A time this afternoon. His presentation will explore how to create culturally grounded environments for young children and their families. The closing keynote that will be presented tomorrow will be presented by nationally renowned and sought after speaking Robin Goebel. Robin has over 15 years of practice in family and child therapy experience, specializing in complex trauma, attachment, and adoption. She will present on the types of experiences that infants may experience due to trauma and toxic stress, as well as the impact that those experiences have on infants' stress response system, regulatory circuits, attachment, and sense of felt safety. Additionally, Robin will host an interactive workshop session where participants will learn how to help parents understand their infants' cues and offer the needed soothing. There are a few things that I want to cover today before we hear from Dr. Sparrow. First, I just want to share a very special thank you to our conference sponsors, which are United Way of Metropolitan Dallas, HOPE's program, Help Me Grow North Texas, Kaplan Early Learning Company, and Texas Health and Human Services Early Childhood Intervention Department. Thank you for your support and all of the work that you do to support positive outcomes for infants, toddlers, and their families. Please be sure to check out our virtual exhibit hall that features the incredible work of each one of our sponsors and offers valuable resources for the children and families that you serve. As stated earlier, we are going to be engaging in separate sections over the next few days. I want you to also note that each session has a different Zoom link. After today's opening keynote, you will leave the webinar and access the link for the Q&A, Advocacy Award presentation, and endorsement ceremony. We will add the link for the meeting prior to the conclusion of this session to the chat box. Additionally, all links have been emailed to you, and if you have not received this email, please reach out to us at info@first3yearstx.org. At the conclusion of the conference, you will also be emailed a survey. This survey will allow you to provide feedback and gain access to your CEU. And as you are listening today, if you have any questions for Dr. Sparrow, please type them in the chat box. Our chat box moderator will collect your questions and present them later on during our Q&A with Dr. Sparrow. If you happen to have any tech issues today, please reach out to tech support at first3yearstx.org. And as you enjoy your day-to-day, please don't forget to snap a screenshot or take a selfie of you attending today's conference and post on social media. We are at First 3 Years on all social media platforms. And now for the moment that we have all been waiting for, I am so excited to introduce our speaker for today's session. Dr. Joshua Sparrow is the Executive Director of the Brazelton Touchpoint Center in the Division of Development of Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, where he holds an appointment in the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Sparrow's care in the 1990s for children hospitalized for severe psychiatric disturbances, often associated with physical and sexual abuse, and for developmental delays, aggravated by social and economic deprivation, prompted his interest in the social determinants of health and community-based prevention and health promotion. He is principal investigator on numerous foundation grants and has lectured nationally and internationally, written numerous scholarly papers, as well as books and articles for the general public. He has advised government agencies, nonprofits, and philanthropies, is a board member of Parents as Teachers, and serves on the advisory boards of the Association for State and Tribal Home Visiting Initiative and Rapid Response Virtual Home Visiting. At the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, his work focuses on cultural adaptations of family support programs, organizational professional development, and aligning systems of care with community strengths and priorities. Examples include collaborative consultation with the Harlem Children's Zone and tribal early Head Start and Head Start programs, among others. Brazelton Touchpoint Center provides professional and leadership development, organizational learning and change, and research and evaluation for family-facing professionals in pediatrics, early childhood, infant mental health, home visiting, and child welfare. Brazelton Touchpoint Center is home to the Touchpoints approach, the Brazelton Institute, Family Connections, and the BTC Research and Evaluation Team. Thank you so much, Dr. Sparrow, for your time and your expertise today.
Thank you, Jaira Knight, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to everybody at First Years for bringing us together today, and thank you all for the work that you do. Today, I'm going to be talking about changing mental models, and I will give you a quick overview of what I'm hoping we can talk about together today. And as Jaira said, please do put your questions into the Q&A box. We will stop along the way for questions, and we'll also collect them for our question and answer session after my talk. So here's what we'll be looking at today. We'll be looking at mental models, and I will try to explain what those are and how they keep systems stuck. We'll be looking at the difference between automatic and deliberative thinking. And again, I will try to explain what those kinds of thinking are and why they matter. And then I'm hoping we can touch on trauma and the ways in which trauma also reinforces mental models and keeps them stuck. And then I want to turn to healing and caring for the caregiver, that's caring for all of you, caring for ourselves. And as we look at trauma, I want to be sure that we look at trauma in our organizations and in our systems, in our communities, and how we can heal. And that involves reflective practice. And then we'll circle all the way back again to mental models, automatic and deliberative thinking. And we might even talk a little bit about love and how love heals. So in this diagram, which some of you may have seen, the idea is that the systems that are in place, oops, sorry, my PowerPoint is a mind of its own, are kept in place by some elements that are underneath the surface that we don't see. And at the very bottom of this iceberg are mental models. So when we look at our systems, we see events over the top of the water. We can see those. We see what is happening, but it's harder to see the patterns of behavior over time, the structures that keep the system in place. And underneath all of them, it's hard to see the mental models, the values, assumptions, and beliefs that shape the systems that we live in and keep them in place. So what is a mental model? We'll take a look at this map. So that looks upside down to those of us who live in the US. And yet, even when it flips around, it still doesn't look quite right, because this map is actually drawn as if we were inside of the Earth looking out at the surface. And so the idea is the way we think and what we think about is based on where we stand and what we can see, and that there's much that we can't see from where we stand, and others who stand in other places, like inside of the Earth or in the Southern Hemisphere, will see things very differently from us. So mental models help people make sense of the world, to interpret their environment and understand themselves. And they include categories and concepts and identities and stereotypes. They include stories and the way we view the world. And as you just saw, the way we view the world depends on where we stand. And mental models are things that we have inside of our own brains, but they're also things that we share with the groups that we're in. So they emerge in a society through the experiences that we share with each other, and they can be passed down across generations, and they can live on even if they're not really helpful for us. And there are problems with our mental models, because sometimes they point to causes of behavior that are wrong, that aren't really what the causes are. And they can get in the way of our seeing where some solutions might be to the challenges that we all want to try to make better. So you can see we're all forming our mental models very early in life, in our interactions with each other, sharing how we think about things. And part of what drives and limits mental models is what is sometimes called automatic thinking. So our brains are complicated, and part of our brain is really designed to very quickly figure out what's going on in our environment, so that we can respond quickly if there's an emergency or if we're in danger. So here, you probably have all heard other talks about the amygdala being the emergency alarm center of the brain that responds rapidly to signals of danger with either flight or freezing or fright. So if you can see my cursor, this emergency response system of the brain involves a fairly limited part of the brain. And that means that with automatic thinking, we will have a quick response, things will come together quickly, we'll have mental shortcuts, and they're based on sort of our preconceived notions. But you can see there's so much more of the brain where all kinds of thinking can go on that aren't engaged in our automatic thinking. So automatic thinking causes us to simplify problems and to see problems through very narrow frames, and we fill in the information that we're not bringing in because we're not engaging the rest of our brain. We fill in the missing information based on our assumptions about the world. Now, these images come from, believe it or not, a World Bank report called Mind, Society, and Behavior. And here's this idea that when we're using our automatic thinking, we have this narrow frame through which we see the world, and we thought where we were was in this countryside landscape, but it turns out that we could very well be in the middle of Manhattan and just looking at Central Park. And here, again, you can see several different frames, each seeing something different. And here's the social aspect of our automatic thinking. We look out through our narrow frame, we see green, we assume it's the countryside. And in fact, when we bring in other people, we are influenced by them as well. So they're seeing a different frame, and they are seeing rain, they're not seeing Central Park. And so we decide to pull out our umbrella too. So automatic thinking is also a social activity. We're not independent, autonomous thinkers or decision makers. We're strongly affected by the social norms and the networks of communities that we're in. So here you can see, I thought I was seeing Central Park, but and a sunny day, and these folks in my network are pulling out their umbrellas, so I guess I should too. So mental models become, I'm sorry, my PowerPoint seems to be jumping around. Mental models, social beliefs and practices become deeply rooted in ourselves and in our social networks. And then we take for granted certain aspects of society as inevitable social facts, things that just we assume have to be true and maybe assume cannot be changed. So our mental models shape our understanding of what is right and what is natural, we think, and what is possible in life, although all of that comes from looking through a very narrow frame reinforced by the people around us that may in fact hide much from us. And when group behaviors influence our preferences and these combine into larger group behaviors, then whole societies can end up coordinating their activities around a common focus that may actually be destructive for all of us. So in the diagrams from the World Bank report that I showed you, there's no harm in pulling out an umbrella, even if you don't need it. But you can see how when we have a narrow frame based on the assumptions that come to mind most easily, the people around us have the same kinds of assumptions, we may end up heading off in a destructive direction. And I don't think I have to give you examples of all of the ways in which that's been happening in our world. So automatic thinking, I think you now can see, is the neurocognitive basis for implicit bias, the way in which we engage parts of our brains, but not all of the other parts of our brains that could give us a broader frame, are how we end up having assumptions about groups of people. So mental models can also be sort of where our internal racist beliefs live. I want to be clear that racism is structural and systemic. It's historic and it's current. It's not just inside of our brains and inside of our social networks, but it is also, racism is also a mental model reinforced by our social networks. So in our center, the Browston Touchpoint Center, and you can find out more at browstontouchpoints.org, for more than 25 years, we've really been trying to figure out how do you help people discover what their mental models are, because as I showed you, it's at the bottom of that iceberg, and become aware of them, and then open up the frame to think about whether or not there are other things that we could see and think and understand, or are there ways in which we could understand other people's mental models who stand somewhere else and are seeing something different. And so this is the mental model shift that we've been working with professionals in early childhood education and home visiting and infant mental health, in pediatrics, et cetera, in child welfare, from a deficit model to a positive model, from a prescriptive approach to a collaborative one, from rigid discipline boundaries to being flexible, and from holding on to power to letting go of power, and from standing within our own cultures to recognizing that there are all kinds of things that we can learn and come to understand if we can step outside of them. So as we change our mental models with this touchpoints paradigm, we land in this approach to engaging families. We learn to notice when we're judging and to put our judgments aside. We learn to open up to the expertise that parents have. We can find, I think, more authentic ways of respecting families and thinking about them positively. we can step back and listen without our reflexive automatic thinking coming into play to narrow the ways that we might listen and understand. And that can open us up to focus on family strengths and to really be in collaborative relationships with families where families set the agenda for our conversations and we participate together as equal partners. Now, I wanted to give you an example of how this change in mental models applies to the context of opioid use disorder. Now, you may or may not be working with families where that is a challenge, but even if you're not, I thought this might be helpful in terms of thinking about where we've been and where we can go. So in the area of opioid use disorder, and we've been doing a national summit on this issue for the past couple of years, and work with a number of organizations around the country, working in partnership with families in recovery, families living with substance use disorder. And one of the things that we so often see in institutions, in professionals, in policies, is this tension between a punitive approach to a therapeutic and facilitative approach. So there are some states where if a baby is born with a positive toxic screen for drugs, for opioids, the baby is automatically removed from the parent's custody. And in those states, it is reported that mothers will drive across the state line to the state where that isn't the law and give birth to their babies in their cars. A therapeutic and facilitative approach understands opioid use disorder as a brain disorder because opioids change the way the brain works, and it completely changes the way that you work with families struggling with substance use disorder, as well as the policies that strongly influence the ways that you can work. If you take this punitive approach, then you see substance use disorder as a moral failing or a moral weakness. And again, think about mental models, and these are the beliefs that you may have and that may get automatically set off every time a family struggling with a substance use disorder comes into view for you. Whereas another mental model would be to think about substance disorder as a very often chronic, recurring, relapsing brain disease. And as I said, with a mental model that sees substance use disorder as something that is all your fault because you're morally weak, it's a problem with your character, then we take your children away. Whereas if you see it as a relapsing brain disease where we can be most effective with a therapeutic approach, we will focus on family strengthening. And I do know from the work that I've done clinically, there are some families that, at least for some periods in their lives, cannot take care of their children in their homes. And sometimes removing the child is absolutely necessary. So I do understand that. But what I'm saying is the mental model can lead us to be unable to distinguish which families at what points in their development might be able to hold on to their child and make good use of family strengthening resources to be able to grow together. Another part of this mental model is to really look at the problem as these sort of scattered bits and pieces. So it is the adult who has the problem, so we'll just treat the adult. Whereas the mental model that we would want to offer would be to look at the adult with the substance use disorder as being part of a family system. And so the treatment isn't just for the adult alone, it's treatment for this whole family system and for the relationships in this family system. And in fact, because substance use disorder really dismantles just about every area of functioning, employment, you can have legal problems, You can get kicked out of your housing. You may not be able to afford your car repairs. It really takes down every area of functioning, treating the adult alone, not just with therapy or with medication, but really connecting to resources that can support healing in all of the areas of functioning that really get dismantled. And if you don't, if someone can't have their legal record expunged and can't be supported to get back into the workforce and isn't able to find stable housing, then of course that is going to be highly likely to re-trigger relapses of their disease. So a mental model shift from sort of scattered bits and pieces to a systemic approach, and from short-term fixes to lifespan intergenerational approaches. So rather than just treating the adult, to treat the relationship of the adult with their infants and children. And again, I talked about the shift from let's just focus on meds and therapy, which might be silver bullets, to systemic, all of the areas of functioning that are so powerfully affected by substance disorder. And then in this mental model that may be punitive and sees this as a moral failing, well, of course, the provider is going to decide what to do, because the individual with the substance disorder is seen as weak and defective. Whereas if we change our mental model to see this as a brain disease, then we understand this person is struggling with that, and they need the support of their whole family and their whole community to be able to heal. So we do have time for questions after our break, but I want to pause then to see if you do have any. And I'm going to look in the question and answer box. I don't see any. I'll look in the chat. And I don't see any. So we'll continue on. And I now want to move on to talking about trauma. And the reason why I want to talk about trauma in the context of mental models and changing mental models is that trauma is something that triggers that amygdala alarm network in our brain and can make it very hard for us to get past that immediate sort of emergency response to bring in all of the other things that we're capable of thinking and knowing and feeling. And with trauma, when we've been frightened and hurt and betrayed, it can really reinforce this automatic way of thinking, this relying on our assumptions and things we take for granted, and can again really limit our ability to step out, step back, and see other potential solutions. So I thought I would zero in on some of these aspects of trauma. And I first want to say, I think very few of us, if any of us, get through life without experiencing trauma, and often severe trauma. And so want to acknowledge that in talking about this may be upsetting for some of us or many of us. I'm going to try to take us to a good place, but if you feel like you need to sort of turn away and take time for yourself, that's what you should do. So here on this slide are just several elements that are I think really strongly affected by traumatic experiences. And one is the trouble with trust, and that's very commonly spoken to. But I wanted to emphasize or ask what is hard for people who've experienced trauma about trusting. And one of the things that I think we end up with when we ask that question is, it's really hard to discern intent in the other person. So specifically, if we've experienced trauma and we have a hard time trusting, one of the things that's hard for us to do is to know what someone else's intent is. Do you really want to help me? Do you really care? Or do you want to hurt me? Do you want to exploit me? Or maybe do you just not really care. It's very hard to feel that we can understand with certainty what someone else's intentions are when we've experienced the kind of trauma, especially as young children, that have included experiences where people whose intentions should have been to not hurt us and to take care of us actually turned out to not be that at all. Another area that's really hard is self-agency. So for many of us who've experienced trauma, especially as young children, one of the things that has taught us is it can be dangerous if we stand up and say, this is what I think, or this is what I think I should do. And again, you can see how if we've had trouble understanding people's intentions, and if we have the sense that if we decide what we think is right and speak up about it, how this sort of narrows our mental models to looking at the world as a place where we're in danger and where it's really hard to know what other people are up to. Then there's overcompliance, which is not seeing that we might be being mistreated or treated unfairly or unkindly when we are, and accepting that mistreatment, either because we don't even see it that way, or because we think we have no other choice, and if we don't accept it, we might be harmed further. Then there's conflict aversion, avoiding conflict. So for some of us who have experienced trauma, especially as young children and in families, or in other social settings, like schools or faith-based institutions or neighborhoods, conflict may be dangerous. That may be where we got hurt, or where it looks like we could get hurt. And so we may put a lot of energy into trying to make everybody feel better and solve everybody's problems, rather than being self-protective. And we may also see conflict as always being our fault or our responsibility. So again, I think you can see how for those of us who experience trauma, there's this further influence of trauma on narrowing our frames and reinforcing, one particular place that we stand in the world, that mental model. And I don't mean to say that mental models are always all about trauma, but just to sort of add in this layer. And I think if you go back to what I was saying about how whole social groups can come together with a mental model that ends up leading them to activities that are destructive, you can think about whole social groups that have experienced trauma, or at least fear. And then there's self-blame. So often, especially when children have been traumatized, they're led to believe that what happened to them is their fault, and it's because they're bad. And that can live on. And again, that can be the way that we stand in the world and look at what's going on around us. And that can really interfere with seeing in a different mental model the roles and responsibilities of all kinds of other people and forces that lead to things that might be hard for us. And if we blame ourselves and feel like, well, we're no good because the bad thing that happened to us was because we're bad, then it can make us feel like we probably aren't good enough or capable enough or smart enough to be able to make things better, so we may not take that risk. So all of these may be, very clear and well known, but these last two are ones that I find when I talk about them with friends and colleagues, people are really struck by how, in a way, they're so obvious and yet they're so hard for us. So accepting appreciation. Many of you, perhaps all of you, work with infants, children, parents, colleagues, care deeply about what you do, have devoted your life to what you do, and have developed really important competence in what you do. But when people appreciate who you are, what you do, and how you do it, and how important it is for them, what's it like for you to hear that? Can you really hold on to that, let it in, and accept it? Can you believe it? And often that's really hard for those of us who do this kind of work. And so just think about what that's like and why you may deflect expressions of appreciation of you and who you are and what you do and how you are. Why you may deflect those appreciations, why you may minimize them or devalue them or question them or feel like, who, me? They couldn't be talking about me. And so what is it that makes it hard to let love in? And I think in a way, being able to accept being appreciated and letting love in does ask for a certain kind of risk and a certain kind of vulnerability, which can also be hard for those of us who have experienced trauma, especially early in life. So as we talk about trauma and the way it reinforces mental models, I wanted to be sure also to talk about all of you and all of us, and the need to care for the caregivers is not new, but it has certainly become even more important in these past terribly difficult years. And so when we talk about what is hard for caregivers and where care is needed, we can look at these 5 elements. And again, part of why I wanted to bring this to you in the context of mental models is, if we're struggling in these ways that I will talk a little bit more about, it can be also hard to step out of the place we stand, the beliefs we hold, and the way we see the world, to open up to other ways of thinking and feeling and believing, because we just don't have the energy. We're struggling with these kinds of things. So as we think about why caregivers need to be cared for, it's in part because those of us who've been drawn to this kind of work tend to have some things in common. And I don't mean to make assumptions about any of you, but you may see your selves in some of these things. We thrive when we do this work. This work is really important to our sense of who we are and our own well-being. And to do this work, we bring to it a need to fix, a need to please, a need to take on others' burdens. And as I said, when I was talking about trauma, we may also be uncomfortable with conflict and need to fix that too, or make it go away. And because of the kinds of things that draw us to this work, we feel deeply other people's pain. And because we do, we can be at risk for what is called compassion fatigue, which is when we give so much of ourselves to feel other people's pains, we can feel used up. And like there just isn't any more room in our hearts to carry more of the pain of the infants and children and families and colleagues that we work with. And that we may just not know how to let in more or to let go of what we've been holding. And when that happens to us, we may find that we're beginning to feel like we don't know if we can keep on caring. And for those of us who are drawn to the work, because it's so important for us to experience caring for others. In that moment where we feel like, I don't know if I can keep on caring, or I'm not caring right now, it feels terrible. It's a terrible thing to admit to oneself, and yet it happens, I think, to so many of us. So here are some fairly concrete ways of caring for the caregiver, and I did want to get concrete, and there have been studies that have highlighted these kinds of things. Really important for people doing direct service work to have supervisors work with them to look at their caseload quantity and balance, and with the loss of the workforce in our fields, this is even tougher. And I think this is part of what's driving burnout. It's also really important to very purposefully stop and look at everyday small successes as often as possible. Because if we aren't able to bring into focus and celebrate the everyday small successes, we lose our sense of orientation to our tasks. We lose our sense of being effective and competent at what we're doing, and we lose our sense of purpose. And we need those things to be able to keep on doing this work and to feel good about doing the work. Reflective supervision has clearly been shown to be important in caring for ourselves and each other. And then really clear and explicit focus on regular and effective balance between work, home, and I add play there, and self-care. And I worry a lot then when people talk about self-care, it can feel like a total empathic failure, because it's really hard to care for yourself if you're severely underpaid, or you're having to work multiple jobs, and you've got to travel an hour and a half to get to work because housing is too expensive near to your work. So when do you have the time to possibly be able to care for yourself? So I don't want to use that term to suggest that it is necessarily even possible for so many, just to say that without it, that's part of why burnout is such a growing problem. And then many of us need a clear path for professional advancement so that we can feel clear that the work we're doing now will help us grow and very concretely help improve our lives in terms of improving our wages and opportunities. So people have actually really looked closely at this issue of burnout. And as I say, I wanted to focus on burnout because it is part of being used up so that we get stuck in a mental model and looking and feeling in one certain way that can leave out other useful ways of thinking for our work. So here's a way of thinking about what burnout is and isn't. It's work-related. It can overlap with depression, but it's distinct. It can lead to depression, but it's distinct. And it does occur in people who may never have had any mental health challenges or history. It is often expressed or goes along with physical distress, like just you feel physically exhausted, as well as emotionally exhausted, like there's just nothing left of me to give or to feel. And then this depersonalization idea is really important. And it's this idea that as much as I went into this work because of my deep desire to care and my capacity for compassion, I'm finding myself feeling really negative and really cynical about the families I work with and the people I work with. And I pull back and disengage and just can't like really feel in the work with the passion and caring that I've had. And that same kind of negative, cynical attitude I bring towards myself, like I just don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything here and I'm not really doing anybody any good. And then of course, then our ability to be effective declines understandably. So I also wanted, so that's burnout. I also wanted to really sort of define some terms to be clear here. So as I mentioned earlier, compassion fatigue is more specifically this idea that when our caring work feels like we're not able to make things better for people, when the struggles that we are dealing with and the people we work with are just too painful for us to hold. And there's no way to let go of both the feeling that whatever I'm doing isn't enough to make things better, and the pain is just too much that I'm holding, then it's to just stop caring. And of course, it's a really hard thing to admit, and it's a terrible way to feel for those of us who have gone into this work for the reasons that we have. And moral injury is a little bit different. Moral injury is this idea that I know exactly what would make things a whole lot better for this baby or this young child or this family, but it's not within my power. It might be they need housing, they need food, they need someone to pay their electricity bill, they need competent legal aid. And it's not that that's not my role, it's just that I don't have the power to even sort of, figure out how to help them get the things that they need. So when we are working with families in a world where there are these social determinants of their health and mental health that go way beyond our own power, we experience moral injury. We know what the right thing would be that would make things a lot better, but it's not happening, and we don't have a path to make it happen. So there are efforts to prevent burnout, and this is really important for us to be able to access mental models beyond the ones that we may be stuck in, that keep the systems that we're in stuck. So one part of burnout prevention is understanding what burnout, stress, and trauma are, understanding their causes and what it looks like, and then promoting some of the ways of reducing it that I just touched on. And then there are some specific ways of thinking and behaving that can also help. And here are just some of them. One is to give ourselves permission to prioritize self-care. And often those of us who have gone into the caregiving professions will take care of everybody else before we'll take care of ourselves. And yet you all know on airplanes, we always hear to put on our own oxygen masks before helping the child who's traveling with us. So prioritizing our own self-care. And then there's really focusing on the small everyday successes that give us a feeling of, I'm pretty good at what I do. And I am, when I act, able to make good things happen, even if they're these small everyday successes. Then there's being ready to seek and accept help. And I think it's really important to stop and ask, if we aren't, why is that? What makes that hard? Do we feel like we do not deserve to be helped? Does that have to do with our experience of trauma and sense of worthlessness? Do we have trouble trusting that someone will care enough to be able to help us? Can we trust that they won't hurt us? Does that have to do with our experience of trauma? And then another is to accept the limits of our roles and what we can do. And that doesn't mean that nonetheless, we need to be flexible about going beyond our role to connect people we work with people who do things that are different than our role, but to understand the limits of what we do, so we don't hold ourselves responsible for, or don't beat ourselves up for things that are just not within our power. And then the last one here is being open to engage in professional and personal relationships for support. And of course, relationships are really so critical to preventing burnout or overcoming it. So as we're talking about caring for the caregiver, I wanted to talk about vicarious trauma, which, I imagine many or perhaps all of you have experienced. And vicarious trauma is really this idea that as we learn about the stories of the babies and children and families that we work with and colleagues, we feel it. We have that capacity to feel it, because that's why we do the work that we do. And because we feel it, it can really start to weigh on us. We may become preoccupied with it. We may not be able to get it off our minds. And secondary trauma actually means when vicarious trauma becomes our own post-traumatic stress syndrome, where because of the trauma that we've experienced vicariously that others have experienced, when we actually develop the whole syndrome, that's referred to as secondary trauma. So this is understandable and probably unavoidable in the work that we do. And I think we need to be ready for it. We need to be able to recognize it so that we can heal ourselves. So here are 5 ways of healing ourselves that I want to bring to you. And these are all in some briefs on trauma that I wrote for the Office of Ed Start. And I think we probably should have these on our browsingtouchpoints.org website as well. So let's start with honoring our gift of compassion. So it is our ability to feel the pain of others that allows us to understand the feelings of others. And it's these feelings that are our guide in the work we do with families. And yet these feelings stir up our own feelings. So they do take a toll. Our ability to feel the pain of others is what we need to be able to do our work, but it takes a toll. And at the same time, it's a gift that we have, and not everybody has this gift. And it is an important part of who we are and why we do this work. So honoring our gift of compassion is really about understanding, yes, what we do is hard, and it means holding others' pain alongside with them. And yet to recognize it is a gift that we have, and it may be part of why we are here in our lives on this planet to do this work. And there is an honor in having this gift and in being able to do this work. So we may find it helpful to reflect on and really value our ability to be compassionate. And here's again this part that can be hard for those of us who do this work, to attend to our own feelings with the same compassion that we attend to the feelings of others. So when we hold the feelings of others, the hard feelings, the painful feelings, can we also attend to our own feelings with the same kind of compassion? And if we bring respect and kindness, for example, to the pain of others, to attend to your own feelings with that same respect and kindness. So next is accepting the limits of what we can offer. And because we feel deeply with others, of course we want to fix things and make things better and make people feel better, even when we can't. So as a result, we may hold ourselves responsible for changing things that we actually can't change. And we may beat ourselves up about not being able to change the things that we can't. So we can learn to notice that that's what we're thinking. I need to fix this. I feel guilty that I can't. We can learn to notice those kinds of thoughts and how they drain the energy that we really need for this work. And then we can learn to protect ourselves from guilty feelings that we do not deserve, with a kind of self-talk that says, there you go again. You know, this is the kind of thing that of course you wish you could change, but of course it's not within your power. And there you go, beating yourself up again about it. But you don't need to. It's not helping anybody for you to do that to yourself. And you need to protect yourself so that you can do what is within your power and not use up the energy you have beating yourself up about the things that you can't do. save our energy to focus on doing everything that we can do. And that partly involves, I think, refocusing on the importance of what we actually can do, which I will come to in a moment, or at least parts of that. But while we're accepting the limits of what we can offer, we can honor this urge to fix things, again, as part of our gift of compassion. And as we remind ourselves to focus on what we can do, we can let go of what we can't do. And when we're with people where we're struggling with our own feelings about this, we can say, I will do everything in my power to do what I can to be with you through this. And that's different than saying, I will fix this, I will solve this problem, I will make everything all better. You are just speaking to your commitment, which is real, to do what you can. And you're also being clear to yourself that your commitment is to what you can do and not to what you can't. And the other important thing in language like this is part of what you can do is to be alongside with you through this. And often when we want to fix things that we can't, we fail to recognize that being in relationship with is so often missing for people, and yet it is often the most powerful and healing thing that we can do. So we're likely to keep wishing that we could do more, and we may need to work on giving ourselves permission to let go of what is not in our power. So, as I was saying, as we let go of what is not in our power and recognize what is, we can recognize that the supportive relationships that we can be in may be more healing than we think. And this is another place where I think looking at mental models is important, because there may be some children or some families or some colleagues with whom we struggle to be in supportive relationships because we're stuck with a way of thinking about them or feeling about them, which is that mental model. It may be something about them that hurt us or frightened us or disappointed us or discouraged us, or that got us thinking about a set of beliefs and associations that make it hard to step back and see what is hopeful in them, or what is good, or what is strong in them. So just this idea of not underestimating the importance of what we can do, which often is being in relationship. And when we struggle with that, to be able to step back and look at whether or not the mental model that's been set off in this relationship may be part of the struggle. So we can connect with others' experiences with a simple heart-to-heart statement that expresses our commitment to our relationship with them. I will do my best to understand and to stay in this with you, no matter what. Now, that's different than saying, I know just what it's like. Personally, I don't think we ever know what it's like to be someone else. It's not the same as saying, I know what you're going through because I went through something like that. I don't think we ever really understand, even if we find it helpful to draw on our own experiences, and it really can help. I think in our communications, we need to be clear, I'm going to try really hard to understand, and that's my commitment to you. But by being clear that I don't necessarily, I'm coming to you with some humility, as well as my commitment. And this also speaks to this idea of mental models, that we often are stuck in our mental models, and there's work involved in being able to step outside of them, to have broader access to broader frames, broader ways of seeing, to get closer to understanding someone else's experience. So it may not be able to say, I know how you feel, because we often don't know what someone else's experience is like. And families may not find it helpful to hear, you must feel so, because then we're telling them what we think they're feeling rather than being open to whatever they're feeling. So again, those kinds of statements can come out of our mental models, our assumptions about how to understand them. So instead, to notice we may be making assumptions based on our mental models, and then to try to be welcome to whatever someone might be feeling that might surprise us, that might fall outside of our usual experience and ways of thinking about things. And this can be particularly helpful when we're working with people whose cultures are different from our own, because what they feel and how they express what they feel may be initially hard for us to recognize or understand. And then going to this next way of caring for ourselves, to seek and find the gratitude in the deeply meaningful work that we do, and seek connection and comfort in our own relationships. So our work is hard, and it's often undervalued, under-recognized, and underpaid. But the idea here is to be able to say, we don't have any doubt about the importance and value of our work, and that our work matters. When we get up in the morning and go to do what we do, we don't have to ask ourselves, why is it that we are devoting this time in our lives to this work? And if it doesn't feel that way, again, to be able to focus not on what we can't do, but on what we can. And as we build relationships that create safety and trust, and offer reliability and predictability and consistency, so that infants and children and families can heal, we can find connection and comfort in creating that space for them and for ourselves and for each other. And again, when we think about accepting appreciation and letting love in, I'm not sure we all even recognize how important and powerful finding comfort and connecting with us is to the children and families that we work with. And then within work, but outside of work, we all do need at least one person who we know cares about us, can listen to and accept all of our feelings, and reminds us that we are not alone. And we don't always have that person in our lives, but I think we all need at least that one person. And here's another place where you can see how being in relationship can also help you notice when what you're thinking and feeling and seeing and the action you're going to take may be stuck in a mental model. Is relationships may be with people who reinforce those beliefs, but they may be with people who bring you something else to focus on, or a fresh perspective, or humor that helps you sort of step back from what you're thinking and look at it critically, or to just bring to you a sense of peace that opens up more energy for you to be able to think more broadly and freshly. So I see that we've got some questions, but because we've just got a couple of minutes before we get to our break, we will save them for then. And I am going to now just talk about trauma and systems, which actually was right where I was, so I didn't need to do that. There we go. So we've talked about trauma in individuals and its relationship to burnout and the need for caring for the caregivers, but we can't really care for ourselves and for each other and for the children and families we work in when we work in systems that are traumatized. And systems are made up of people, so I think we all have a role here. So this work comes out of a project in Santa Clara County that we had the privilege of being involved in. And I just wanted to share this thinking about trauma and systems. So these are quotes. I've got 3 of them. The first is, like people, organizations are susceptible to trauma in ways that contribute to fragmentation, numbing, reactivity, and depersonalization. And those are all things that happen with individual trauma as well. But picture in an organization, people go off into their separate silos, they stop feeling or caring, they react with a mental model in place rather than slowing down to think about what else might be going on, and are not fully engaged. A system cannot be truly trauma-informed unless the system can create and sustain a process of understanding itself. And that is where reflective practice across systems matters. And I will come to that as we round the bend here. And then lastly, as we think about trauma-informed healing-focused systems, trauma-informed system principles and practices support reflection instead of reaction, curiosity instead of numbing, self-care instead of self-sacrifice, and collective impact rather than siloed structures. And you can see here how this ties back to the mental model idea. So automatic thinking gets us to a reactive mental model, whereas reflection pulls us past automatic thinking to the other functions in our brains that allow us to bring in other memories, other associations. So does curiosity. And when we can care for ourselves rather than sacrifice ourselves, we've got more energy and openness to go beyond that kind of automatic thinking that reinforces a mental model that we'll be stuck in. And collective impact is this idea of, let's go connect with people who stand in places we don't, who may see things that we don't, who can expand what we know and how we think. So I am now going to wrap up in the last minute before our break to talk about how we can use reflective practice both within ourselves and in our organizations and systems to move beyond the mental models that keep us and our system stuck. We can embed the kind of changes that I gave you that example of with regard to substance use disorders in our reflective professional development, and also in the way that our organizations are run, and in whole communities, we can try to come together to build this into the ways that we parallel our work and work together. We can use reflective practice across whole systems to identify when we're using automatic thinking that goes to this first thing that comes to mind, the thing that doesn't require reflection, the assumptions and biases, and to build our capacity for deliberative thinking, which is distinct from automatic thinking because it means pausing, reflecting, observing where we may be making assumptions or taking things for granted or only seeing one side of things, and then bringing in, well, what are the things that we don't know? What are other people's perspectives? Or here are the set of memories that are reinforcing my automatic thinking. Are there other things that actually have happened to me or that I did know about that might open up and broaden what I'm thinking? That's what deliberative thinking is. It's bringing in broader parts of the brain as well as the experiences that our memories hold. We can use reflective practice to uncover the mental models that keep us stuck and lead us to unproductive or even destructive actions. And we can use reflective practice to strengthen social ties that can build and reinforce productive mental models while taking down those that have led us down a path that's causing harm. So reflective practice, uncovering our mental models and our automatic thinking, takes humility. And I think to sort of use this kind of exercise of assuming we could be wrong. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. and we're going to make a bunch of mistakes. And then reflective practice in our organization, so that that's not just okay, but that that's valued. And that if it doesn't feel safe and celebrated, to say, hey, this is something I probably don't know anything about, or I think I probably got that all wrong, or I really, I blew that. If that doesn't feel safe, and if we can't celebrate that, then to work on the way that we feel about being with each other in our organization, so we can all feel safe to work in humility with each other. So as we talk about shifting from automatic thinking to deliberative thinking, just to reinforce, it engages a broader range of neural networks. So I showed you the amygdala and the sort of relatively small network of freeze or fight or run away. That's automatic thinking. And deliberative thinking is going to engage the prefrontal cortex and the frontal cortex, and more of our emotional centers, so that we'll have more memories and ideas and thoughts and ways of processing to be able to understand the information that's coming to us, that will take us to a more broadly informed place than where our automatic thinking does. So other associations, experiences, contexts, people, and perspectives. And just as deliberative thinking can take us to that better place, so does love, and so does letting love in. And I actually think we find our way to letting love in through deliberative thinking, when we can notice, oh, that's my automatic reaction, that's the mental model that I always tend to bring to things, but it's not helping me right now. I'm assuming that this person is doing this because that's what they always do, but I'm not giving them a chance to show me that this time they're doing it in a new and different way. So you can see how, if we become aware of our mental models and of our automatic thinking, and then pause and reflect, say, well, what else can I bring in here? That is part of how we get to the love that we need to take care of ourselves, that we need to support our own healing and the healing of others. And part of the power of love is that it regenerates itself. The more love you find and give, the more love there is in you, and the more love that comes back to you. Love does spread love. So I will stop there, and we have a break, after which we will come back for questions.
Dr. Sparrow, if you still had some more information that you would like to continue, we still have about 20 minutes until our break. We're going to break at 10:15. No worries at all.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I do. I think it's the Eastern time, Central time thing. So we have until 10:15 your time, 11:15 my time.
Right, correct.
Okay, all right, sorry.
It's okay.
So great. Well, there was so much more that I wanted to share, and maybe first, though, I will stop and look at the question that we have here, and it may be what are some manifestations of adult relationships with attachment when trauma has been prevalent in childhood, especially when the trauma wasn't addressed in childhood? Yeah, I think I'm going to come to that when I dig more into trauma. So that's really kind of great. Thank you for that question. Oops, that wasn't where I want to go. So I think what I'd like to do is go to how we think about healing. There we go. How do you think about healing? And hopefully I'll be able to make the connection to this question. So here are some ways of thinking about healing from trauma as a process. It's a repair of disruptions in health and well-being. It's a recovery of capabilities and functions. And then there is growth in ways that build new strengths. And healing from a traumatic event, I don't think means that we ever forget the event or ever erase its effects. Over time, though, the events and effects can be remembered, they can be understood, and they can be felt in new ways, which then can reduce distress, although not entirely. And sometimes I think we need to feel the distress, and that's productive. And that process of remembering, understanding, feeling in new ways, reducing distress, can uncover and expand personal strengths that we probably never thought we had. So one way of thinking about this is as a kind of spiral of development. And this question about dealing with trauma during childhood, this is the way I look at that. Dealing with trauma and healing is a lifelong process. It's not like you get done. I don't think closure happens. I think what happens is we do what we can with the hurts and harms that we carry, given the capacities that we have at any point in our lives. So young children can't address trauma in a definitive and then we're done way. They may be able to bring the developmental capacities that they have to get to a certain point in their healing, and then that's as far as they can get. So, for example, I worked once with a child whose father died when she was 4, who was very symptomatic, lots of trouble with feeding and with sleep and other things. And the work for a 4-year-old was in play. And so she told the story of a family with a mother and a father and children, and things happening to the father over and over and over in all kinds of different ways. And her symptoms got better. It didn't mean that she got done with the loss of her father, or that when she was 9 or 15, the loss of her father wouldn't cycle back to ask her to think again about what that's like for her now. So I think about the process of healing from trauma as a spiral, where you bring to it what you can given the developmental capacities that you have at that age and the experiences that you've had up until that point in your life, and what the demands and opportunities for that point in your development are. And then I think what's really important for healing is being able to be the rest of who you are, so that then at the next point in your development where you need to focus on it again, you've had the chance to discover you're not worthless. You don't have to blame yourself. It's not because of something bad you did that your father died, which is what 4-year-olds, are very likely to think. That you have had experiences in relationships with people where you could trust them and they didn't hurt you or they didn't die on you, so that those experiences that you have in real life, whether it's in school or through your faith-based community or in your creative activities or just being in your body and being whole in your body, all of those kinds of everyday lifelong experiences that are different at different points of development, feeling your whole self with your competencies and what is good and strong about you allows you then to come back to the hurt when your development is saying it's time for you to face it again. So I see it that way, rather than there's sort of one intervention at one point in time that's going to take care of the whole thing. And to talk about reclaiming and reaffirming and self-determining in the sense that, well, let me reclaim my sense of who I am, who is in my life, and what life can be. Let me reaffirm that, and let me recognize that even though things happened to me over which I had no control, there are things that I do have control over and can self-determine in my life. I also wanted to, as we talk about healing, share with you Sean Ginwright's work, which I find really important and really refreshing. And I see it as a step beyond trauma-informed care, not undoing it, but sort of another layer beyond trauma-informed care, to what he calls healing-centered engagement. And I think you may have heard some of this in what I just said about how I see healing. But one of the central concepts is that I am more than what happened to me. I'm not just my trauma. And that's why, although there may be moments in our sort of spiraling of development when we really do need to think about what happened to us. We really need to talk about it. There are other times where we actually don't, and it's not helpful, and it just makes us feel worse. And where instead we need to be more than our trauma and feel good about ourselves, or competent or effective, or that we matter to people, or we can have some positive impact on the world, or that our bodies and our minds feel good, or that we're creative, that's the me beyond my trauma. And I think part of what happens in healing is that the hurt doesn't go away, but we hold it differently, and the space it occupies is reconfigured and changes as we heal. And at first, in the immediate aftermath of the trauma, it kind of takes up all the space, all we can think about, and influences sort of the whole way we are in the world. And I think over time, through being able to tell the story of what happened, but also through being able to be more than just what happened, it can get reconfigured. So we say, yeah, that did happen to me, but it doesn't define me. Now, another really important point is trauma isn't just an individual experience, it's a collective one. And in everything that I've said about trauma, I've been saying we and our, because I think most of us, and perhaps all of us, have had experienced trauma. And I don't mean, minor trauma. I mean, most would probably experience, I don't think you get through life without losing someone you love, or having someone you love be seriously ill, or having a serious illness yourself, and all kinds of other really hard things happen. So in that sense, it's collective, because I think part of being human and being human with each other is understanding that's part of our shared experience. And it's also because many of the hard things that happen to us happen because of the way our societies are set up. And I think Sean Ginwright has more to say about that. And that's why offering a holistic approach to fostering well-being that goes beyond the individual is so important to layer on top of trauma-informed care focused on the individual. So when you ask the question, what's right with you, instead of what happened to you, you shift from seeing people who've experienced trauma as victims to seeing them as agents in the creation of their own well-being. Agents in the creation of their own well-being. So I think if you connect that to what I said just a little while ago, it is the experience of actually being able to self-determine. I can have some impact, I can have some influence, I can have some power, I can have some control. That's so important for healing, especially for people who've experienced trauma as children, or children who experience trauma, because one of the hardest things about that kind of trauma is it's a moment where the child had no control, where the child had no say, where someone else had taken over. So it also matters because so often the harm is not in a vacuum. It's not just within the individual sphere. It happens within neighborhoods and communities, institutions, and is often driven by policy. And when we shift from asking what happened to you to what's right with you, we also shift to a strength-based approach. So again, I think you can see where in order to make these shifts, we need to become aware of our mental models and then reflect on them and notice where they may be leaving something out and leaving us stuck. So part of Sean Ginwright's approach to healing-centered engagement, and I found this in the work that I've had the privilege of being able to do in many places around the country, including many Indigenous communities, is the healing role of culture. Culture can be a way of understanding who we are, who our people are, where we come from, what is good and strong and special and important about me and us and the people I'm connected to give a sense of like who my community is and what the experiences are we share, and that I belong to this community. And if you think about how isolating the experience of childhood trauma can be, no one knows, it's a secret. If you tell, I will kill you. Or if you tell, no one will believe you. Or there's so much shame associated with it that you will not tell because it just brings shame on yourself. That being able to have the sense of belonging, to have the sense of shared experiences in community is so important to healing. And another part of the role of culture in healing-centered engagement is that culture really is not just sort of in one silo or bucket somewhere. It really spreads across all of our experience. And again, if you go back to thinking about mental models, well, if our mental models based on our thoughts and beliefs and attitudes and experiences, well, so much of those are really shaped by the culture or cultures that we operate and experience in. And when we look at culture as a place where healing can happen, we can think about the role of music and dance and arts and movement and stories and spirituality in healing. And so often that's left out of the sort of traditional institutional approach to mental health and healing, which is mostly about talk therapy and meds. So Sean Ginwright goes on as he talks about how to heal. And I think this gets at this idea of a spiral, where there are times where it's really important for us to be able to come back and think again about what happened to us and to take stock of how it hurt, how it harmed us, what kinds of difficulties it created for us in our lives, what kind of roadblocks it put in our way. And then there are other times where we kind of did as much of that as we could, and it might really take us down if we stay there for a whole lot longer, and we need to sort of get back to being in our strength and being in our belonging. So to acknowledge the harm and injury, but to not be defined by it. And I think in concrete terms, it's that process of sometimes it helps to think about it and reflect on and talk about it. And sometimes it's important, you know, this is just, I'm just stuck in that right now and I'm not getting further. I need to pull back from that and to not be defined by it and sort of be the rest of who I am. And I think this happens very much for young children, and so much of their healing is in everything else that you all do, that we all do, to give them opportunities to be the rest of who they are and who they're becoming. It's also critical to be able to dream and imagine so that we have hope and optimism about what could be possible. And I feel that if we don't have hope, we really don't have much to work with. And this is really important with regard to healing from trauma, because I think all too often people think about trauma as this kind of permanent scar that just really limits and boxes you in. And when I say you can't forget it or erase it and it's always there, I'm also saying, but you can change how you think about it. You can change the story you tell about it. You can change how you hold it and the space it occupies, sort of where it touches and what it doesn't in you and in your life. And that, I think, opens up a lot of possibilities to dream and imagine, and to be hopeful. And he also notes that it's hard to do those things when, in the context that we might be living in, just getting by each day is an enormous struggle, and there are crises every day. That can make it very hard to see beyond the present. And I think it's those kinds of specific material conditions that can interfere with healing, because then we don't get a chance to be able to have the kinds of experiences that allow us to then hold the trauma differently and have a different story to tell. And as I said, he also believes that healing is a process that we navigate for a lifetime. And that may sound upsetting or discouraging, but if you remember that that process of navigating it will reveal strengths and potential that you never knew you had, then it doesn't have to be discouraging at all. It does mean navigating, it does mean taking stock of what was hard and how it interfered and where it threw up roadblocks. But as you do, you may discover, I can get those roadblocks out of the way now. I can get around them now. And also, notice that, the stuff that I got through and the stuff that happened to me has given me powers and potential that maybe people who never were exposed to those kinds of challenges never had a chance to develop. So I shared with you, I misunderstood our stopping time with our time zone differences. So I now want to go back to, I think, another really good place to wrap up. And it's, again, going back to systems. And that's because when Sean Jinwei says, let's layer healing-centered engagement on top of trauma-informed care, and to understand trauma isn't just an individual experience, it's a collective experience, and a lot of the harm happens because of the systems and structures that we live in and the policies that hurt people. That's another reason for us to look at how we change systems and structures. So I'm now going to go to the work of my friend John Kania and Peter Senge, Hal Hamilton on systems change. And some of you may be familiar with John Kania's work with collective impact. And I want to start by saying, you all are leaders. If you have a family, you have a leadership role in your family. You may be a leader in your apartment building or on your street block, or with the group that you work with. We all, I think, are leaders if we broadly define them. Their children are leaders, and you can see who the children are if you work in the classroom who are leaders, and others who are working on becoming leaders, and others who may need help. So I really think this applies to all of us in some way. So here are the three core capabilities of system leaders to foster collective leadership, which we need for the collective leading that trauma requires, a collective healing that expanding our mental models requires. See the larger system, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about each of these. See the larger system, see our taken for granted assumptions. Those are those mental models, so that we can go beyond them to hear different points of view, recognize where there might be solutions that we weren't seeing, and to shift from reactive problem solving to co-creating the future. So I hope you can see and hear how to be a systems leader, we need to move from automatic thinking, which we need sometimes to be able to bring in deliberative thinking and all of the other kinds of understandings and perspectives and knowledge that that brings. So first, just to look a little bit more into this ability to see the larger system. And this comes from the paper Dawn of Systems Leadership that was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. So I'll just read these to you, and then we'll wrap up and take our break and come back for questions. So the ability to see the larger system in any complex setting, that can be a family, it can be a neighborhood, it can be a classroom, it can be where you work. People typically focus their attention on the parts of the system most visible from their own vantage point. Remember that diagram I showed you of the guy looking out the window and he thought he was seeing the countryside, but he was actually looking at Central Park in the middle of Manhattan. Where we stand is what we see, and we don't see what other people see who are standing someplace else. So this usually results in arguments about who has the right perspective on the problem, because our perspectives may be really different and we don't see each other's perspectives. But helping people see the larger system is essential to building a shared understanding of complex problems. And most of the problems that we encounter in our work are complex. So this understanding, the shared understanding, enables collaborating organizations to develop solutions together that are not clear to any of them as individuals. It's when they come together and can open up to each other's perspectives that they can see solutions they couldn't see alone, and then they can work together to improve the whole system that we work in, whether it's a classroom or an agency or an organization, rather than just putting Band-Aids on one part of the problem. Second, fostering reflection and more generative conversations. And you heard me talk about reflection as a way of going beyond our mental models and our automatic thinking to bringing in other neural networks to get other perspectives and understandings and to let love in. So here they are in their way saying, with reflection, we think about our thinking, which means we stop and notice, I'm just using my mental model with my assumptions and things I take for granted and my beliefs. And wait a second, let me think about my thinking here. Let me hold up a mirror to see the assumptions I take for granted that I carry into any conversation, and let me appreciate how my mental model may limit me. Deep shared reflection is a critical step in enabling groups of organizations and individuals to truly hear a point of view different from their own, and to appreciate emotionally as well as cognitively each other's reality. This is an essential doorway for building trust where distrust had prevailed, and for fostering collective creativity. So I hope you can see here why I want to talk with you about mental models and shifting from automatic to deliberative thinking into using reflective practice to let love in, because I think you can all see the way the world has been going. We've got to find a way to opening doorways and building trust. And lastly, this is the third point, and then we'll stop. To shift our collective focus from reactive problem solving to co-creating the future. So change often does start with conditions that are undesirable, when we sort of realize you can't take this anymore. And artful system leaders, and that's all of us, help people move beyond just reacting to building positive visions for the future. And that may feel pie in the sky and Pollyanna, but it's really important to be able to imagine and to dream. And you may not get to the dream. It's about taking the steps towards the dream. And this happens as leaders, that's all of us, help each other speak to what we really aspire to, and to really build some confidence that we can make some small, concrete steps towards the vision that we co-create for our future. And this shift from reactive problem solving, putting Band-Aids on things that are just going to peel off, the shift from that to building inspiring visions means facing difficult truths about the present reality. It means facing difficult truths about present reality. That's why humility is so important, in being ready to know, I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to be wrong about stuff, I'm going to be dumb. And to learn how to use that tension between where we want to go, our vision, and the hard things about where we're at, choose that tension to inspire truly new approaches. So I will stop there, and Jaira's here to tell us when and how we will come back for our questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sparrow, for such an incredible kickoff to our conference. We are now at the point in our schedule where we are going to take a break. Please be reminded that our next session is on a different meeting link, and you can now see that link in the chat box. So at 10:25, we will join each other again on the meeting link. And you can also check that link in your email as it has been emailed to you for your reference, okay? I hope you all have a wonderful break and see you at 10:25.